This time could the tide be turning in the United States in favor of gun control and against the National Rifle Association?
I'm a fan of the NRA. I mean, there's no bigger fan. I'm a big fan of the NRA. They want to do right. These are great people. These are great patriots. They love our country. But that doesn't mean we have to agree on everything.
Donald Trump with lawmakers Wednesday asserting he'd stand up to the United States' most powerful lobby group, most notably favoring comprehensive background checks on gun buyers and raising the age of purchase on assault weapons to 21. This in the wake of one of the worst school shootings in U.S. history. Will the president stick to his guns this time? How much more pressure is needed? Students Wednesday returned to their high school in Parkland, Florida for the first time since the killing of 17 by a troubled 19-year-old who bought his weapon over the counter. They're firing up young people around the country to march. In the past, the gun lobbies waited for the outrage to abate. This time, it's not dying down, at least not so far. And the private sector is no longer waiting for lawmakers to act. Walmart, just the latest to jump on board restricting sales to young people and pulling assault weapons materials from its website. Does it mean that companies are now part of that very American argument, a polarized one, an argument that mixes safety, freedom, individuals' rights, and the role of government? Today in the France 24 debate, is this a turning point? With us to talk about it, an American in Paris, Mariah Phillips, is a postgraduate study at Paris's Sorbonne University. Your field, film studies.
Yes, exactly.
All right, well, welcome to the show. And you're from New Jersey.
I am from Plainfield, New Jersey.
Plainfield, New Jersey. Okay.
Yes.
Also with us from Washington, D.C., Daniel Mitchell, chair of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. Thank you for being with us.
Glad to be on the program.
From Los Angeles, Kami Akavan, who heads the nonpartisan information group procon.org. In just one word, tell us what procon.org is.
We are the people's think tank. We present pros and cons of controversial issues. The bottom line being, understand the issues, we can understand each other.
All right, so we'll try to see if there's a common ground on this one, and it seems often there is not. From Brussels, Myriam Duo, member of the advocacy group Alter EU, which campaigns for lobbying transparency at the European level. Who has influence in an argument like this is, of course, important. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. One of the latest tweets from Donald Trump this Thursday, out of that meeting with lawmakers, many ideas, some good and some not so good, emerged from our bipartisan meeting on school safety at the White House. How serious, then, is the president? Uncle Ula has the story.
That maybe that bill
Bringing the art of the deal to America's gun debate. On Wednesday, Donald Trump surprised both Democrats and Republicans as he criticized Congress for being too fearful of the National Rifle Association.
Some of you people are petrified of the NRA. You can't be petrified. They do have great power. I agree with it. They have great power over you people. They have less power over me.
During an hour-long televised meeting at the White House, Trump called on lawmakers to pass stricter gun control laws. He chided both parties, but especially Republicans, for the way they framed the debate. The president rejected a Republican-backed bill linking a background check measure with a bill allowing gun owners to carry concealed weapons across state lines.
You'll never get this passed. If you add concealed carry to this, you'll never get it passed.
Trump endorsed expanded background checks, increased school security and mental health resources, and most controversially, raising the age to 21 for purchasing some firearms, a measure that's fiercely opposed by the powerful gun lobby and many Republicans.
The vast majority of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds in Pennsylvania who have a rifle or a shotgun, they're not a threat to anyone. They're law-abiding citizens.
Trump's push follows a wave of gun reform activism after last month's Florida school shooting, in which a shooter killed 17 people with a semi-automatic AR-15 rifle. Since then, the U.S. retailers Dick's Sporting Goods and Walmart have announced they will no longer sell guns to people younger than 21. Many Democrats, however, fear Trump could backtrack on his strong support for gun reform.
It shouldn't
Congress already has a bad record on passing gun control measures. A bipartisan bill failed twice in the Senate after the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary shooting.
Mariah Phillips, is the president serious?
Honestly, I think that we have tried both sides of taking him seriously and not taking him seriously enough. So I'd like to say the proof is in the pudding. I'd like to wait until he actually does something, and then we can decide whether or not he's serious.
Can decide whether or not he's serious. Let me ask you, Daniel Mitchell, before we go into the specifics of the argument itself and who wields influence on who, what did you think when you heard the president make that remark where he tells the lawmakers that the NRA has power over you people, they have less power over me? Is that true?
I think Trump is just being an empty suit populist, which is what he was before he got into politics and what he is now. You notice how he tried to make himself look bigger by claiming, oh, I'm not afraid, other people are afraid. But actually, the thing to understand is that the NRA itself is not that powerful. The amount of money it gives to politicians is just a tiny fraction compared to what, say, unions give to politicians. The power of the NRA is simply the fact that there are millions upon millions of people in America who passionately care about their Second Amendment rights. That's where they get their power. It's not their money or not their lobbying.
Do you agree with that, Kami Akavan?
I'm nodding my head, yes. You know, the NRA, relative to other organizations, is very effective in its lobbying efforts, despite not having a budget nearly as large as teacher unions and other major industries. That said, this country, the United States, is unique in the world in that it has a Second Amendment, and people cherish that right. It is a sacred right for so many people in this country, and it's a tough discussion to have, to tell people that right needs to be curtailed in order for us to achieve a greater good of a less gun violent society.
Curtailed or interpreted differently, what the Second Amendment means?
Well, that question is the key to the whole debate, because we do not have an unlimited right to the Second Amendment in this country. There are, of course, many restrictions. I cannot go and purchase a tank. I can't purchase a machine gun. A 10-year-old can't purchase an AR-15. There are existing restrictions on guns. So from one point of view, the country is asking the president, their elected officials, to please apply some additional restrictions to keep the guns out of people who are potentially dangerous and will use them for no good purpose. That said, other people who are the real passionate gun advocates see this as a very slippery slope. They believe that what is called an infringement of that Second Amendment will lead to another and another and another. And they see it as eroding a constitutionally given right that they have. So it's a tough discussion to tell someone, we want to curtail that right, but for a greater purpose. And that's where we are stuck in this country for many reasons, but that's certainly part of the reason. Part of the reason.
I want to get back to it, but first I want Myriam Duo's thoughts on how powerful the NRA is. You heard two of our other panelists saying how, they don't have as much money as, for instance, some of the trade unions in the United States who lobby Congress. Is it just about money, the power of a lobbying group?
It's partially about money, not only about that. If you look at, for instance, the NRA, their lobby staff, half of their staff went through what we call the revolving doors. So they are previous government employees coming from the public sector, knowing very well the policies ongoing, the files, the people, and they move on to the private sector, bringing with them their access, their knowledge, their contacts. And this is invaluable for a lobby group. This is something that cannot be bought unless you employ those people, which is what's happening. And this is a crucial point that is not really talked about. I think the campaign contributions are also, regardless of how much they are, you buy the influence very early, which is what is effective lobbying. Is the earlier you lobby, the better results you get. And the NRA, it's undeniable, is extremely good at preventing any legislation from being passed, preventing any progress from happening. This is, I think, something that we can't avoid. And knowing who has influence over what is crucial for a healthy democratic debate. Here in Brussels, the 3 EU institutions make decisions that affect 500 million people. We need to know who has influence over those decisions, who paid whom, who is in contact with whom, in order for us to have a healthy democratic debate.
And who goes through the revolving door, you're saying. And your thoughts, you heard at the outset, I'll put the same question to you that I put to Daniel Mitchell. You heard Donald Trump talking about how the NRA has power over you people and less power over me. What were your thoughts when you heard that in the report?
I again, don't... I think we need to wait and see. I'm not very trustful of what he says in general. I don't think that it's a very void statement, an empty statement that he made to make himself probably look good. And I think that without those, looking into the influence and looking into who is lobbying whom, this is a crucial path towards change. And because the biggest obstacle really here is the lobbying and the influence that's happening behind the scenes after having so many tragedies happening and so much debate by the public opinion. I think this is where things are blocking and the obstacle going to that decision.
And 5 years ago, when there was a mass shooting at an elementary school in Connecticut, the world thought that would be a turning point. It didn't happen. The world's media was there Wednesday when students returned to Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School in Florida 2 weeks after that mass shooting that left 17 dead. The students say they're haunted by what they've endured and heartened by the support.
I'm a little nervous going back, but I definitely feel safer seeing how there's so much security here, and it's just going to be nice to be back with all my friends and teachers.
We don't have enough law enforcement to take these people out. We don't have enough of love just to give these people. All we have is sheer hate for each other, and that's what's tearing America apart.
Mariah Phillips, is this time different?
Honestly, before we saw the students of Parkland come out and galvanize people, not only around America, but also around the world, we see a response to this. Before this, I would have said, no, I think it's going to be just like all the other times. Personally, I felt that when Sandy Hook happened, that was the very lowest that we could possibly go. And I said, if we don't change after this, there's no way we will ever change. But seeing people like Emma Gonzalez standing up through their pain and through their hurt.
This is the young student who had her arm in a sling and who'd been shot and spoke.
She came out and she is just a total superstar, that she is able to talk to people so eloquently and still reach their hearts and be able to explain why this time won't be like the last time.
This time won't be like the last time. Several protests planned by U.S. school students over the coming weeks. There's a 17-minute walkout on March 14th, a march on Washington 10 days later, another event in April to mark the 19th anniversary of the Columbine High School massacre in Colorado. One school superintendent near Houston's having none of it. In a now deleted Facebook post, he warns, should students choose to do so, they will be suspended from school for 3 days and face all the consequences that come along with an out-of-school suspension. That's in a school superintendent near Houston. That posting has drawn a lot of remarks. What do you make of the mood right now among young people?
Honestly, I think that it's something that we have seen since the 2016 election, is that we have had enough. Young people have had enough. They're not going to stand by and let people steer the country or continue to steer the country in a way that is not sustainable, in a way that makes excuses for everything that they have done, from gun control to closing down Planned Parenthoods, everything. We're just sick of it. We're sick of it. And I love that through all of this turmoil and all of this anguish, we're able to say, you know what? I'm not going to just sit at home and wait for this to pass. I'm going to do something about it. And that, to me, is the most heartening thing about all of this.
Yeah, universities have come out saying that if young people have on their criminal records that they've protested peacefully, it will in no way impede their applications for colleges. Daniel Mitchell, those remarks by that school superintendent in Texas, is that an outlier that we're making too much of, or a signifier of just how polarized the United States is?
Well, I don't know whether it's an outlier, but it's certainly true that the country is polarized on this issue. And frankly, I don't see how you get to gun control legislation, because if you look at the bill that the House Democrats proposed, it wasn't just going after AR-15s, which are functionally the same as other rifles. So it's a bit of let's ban scary-looking rifles, and there are other rifles that do exactly the same thing. They want to ban every single non-revolver type gun in the country. And I can guarantee you, when push comes to shove, that's not going to make it through Congress, especially since when you talk to people, especially behind closed doors, they know it won't make a difference. We have more than 300 million weapons in the country. You can print weapons now on these fancy new solid printers. There's nothing you can do that will stop people from getting guns. All that gun control does is it disarms people who need guns for self-protection or who like hunting or things like that. So at the end of the day, I think a lot of people in Congress are going to say, well, we want to do something, but we don't want to just do a feel-good gesture. We need to figure out, how do we keep these crazy people from doing these things? And the honest answer is, we probably can't, unless you repeal the First Amendment, because the one thing we find with all these mass shooters is they are going online, they are reading about press reports of previous mass shooters, and this is their way of trying to make their miserable, pathetic lives meaningful. But I don't want to get rid of the First Amendment to stop them from reading those articles. Sometimes we just have to realize it's just a miserable, sad situation that we're in. I don't know that we're going to stop this unless we somehow figure out how to reach people.
You're right, the number of guns sold has increased, but the gun rules have been progressively relaxed. How do you explain that?
Well, there are more guns being sold because the gun rules are relaxed. But the most important correlation we should be talking about is, while the number of guns have been shooting up, the crime rate's been going down. Criminals make a cost-benefit analysis. At least on some level, they make this cost-benefit analysis. And the fact that their potential victims might be armed, that's a very costly thing for a criminal to consider. So I'm not surprised that the crime rate has fallen as gun ownership among legal, law-abiding people has increased.
All right, we have to take a
challenge.
Daniel, we have to take a very quick break. Okay. We're going to pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're wondering whether the tide is turning when it comes to gun control in the United States after the Parkland shooting in Florida that left 17 dead at a high school there 2 weeks ago. With us to talk about it is Mariah Phillips, a postgraduate student at the University of Paris, the Sorbonne, and who hails from New Jersey. Also with us from Washington, D.C., Daniel Mitchell, chair of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. From Los Angeles, Kami Akavan, who heads procon.org, the information group that looks at pros and cons of hot button issues such as this one. And from Brussels, Myriam Duo, who is with Alter EU, a advocacy group calling for lobbying transparency at the EU level. We talked in part one there just before the break with Daniel Mitchell about the issue of whether or not the more and more guns can be reversed. Let me ask just a Cami Akavan, your reaction to what we heard from Daniel just before the break. Daniel most notably making the point that the crime rate in the U.S. has gone down thanks to people being armed.
Well, a couple of facts I want to share. Number one is that there are, like Daniel mentioned, 300 million plus guns in the United States currently. That's about 88 guns for every 100 people. We have approximately 25% of all U.S. citizens are gun owners. That's owning at least one gun. So you can imagine by the math, most people who own guns own more than one gun. So guns are very prevalent in our society. Now, what Daniel is asserting is that, to me, sounded like there's not a lot we can do about the fact that so many guns exist in our society, and therefore it will always be a problem. The way that we look at it, and using other statistics, is these guns are used in self-defense. True, they're used in self-defense approximately less than 1% of the time that a violent crime is committed. So when they're used, of course, the people really, really value and love that they have that gun. But the reality is the vast majority of the time, over 99% of the time that a violent crime is committed, a gun is not used to prevent that crime from happening. So it's a philosophical issue. Do you think that adding more guns to the equation is going to up that percentage from maybe less than 1% to 2 or 3 or 4%? It's still a small percent. The point is that we have so many guns in this country, we have existing restrictions, and what the people are demanding in public polling is indicating a large majority of Americans are supporting are what they're calling common sense gun restrictions, universal background checks, limiting high-capacity magazines from being sold, upping the age limit for purchase of certain types of weapons. These kinds of things that a lot of people in this country think are just basic things that we should implement. We explore the pros and cons of this. It's obviously very heated. Part of the solution is how to address the partisanship that prevents us from having conversations like the one you and France 24 is thankfully putting together. We have to talk about this stuff. We have to explore the facts. We have to get to both sides. And ultimately, gun owners and non-gun owners are going to be the ones joining hands to make progress.
All right. Well, that's an important issue, which I hope we can bring up later, of why those partisan conversations can happen more often. I want to bring in one other aspect to this, which has really taken off literally in the last week, which is the issue of the major corporations now getting involved. Hours after Dick's Sporting Goods store, a major retailer across the U.S., it was the turn of the United States' largest retailer, Walmart, to announce new measures. The corporate world gauging the mood of consumers, and it appears choosing sides in some instance. Allison Sargent has the story.
American gun buyers under 21 are no longer welcome at their local Walmart. The retail giant became the second major company to raise the age limit on its arms and ammunition sales. Walmart already stopped selling assault rifles in 2015, claiming it came as a result of decreased customer demand. This time, they made it clear their decision is a response to the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, that left 17 dead.
In light of recent events, we've taken an opportunity to review our policy on firearms sales. Going forward, we are raising the age restriction for purchase of firearms and ammunition to 21 years of age.
Walmart's announcement came hours after the CEO of another major retailer said that his company was immediately ending all sales of assault-style rifles in its stores. Dick's Sporting Goods also announced they are imposing a 21-year age limit on all gun purchases.
Yeah, no chance you're going to reverse this.
Never. And we know that this isn't going to make everyone happy. But when we take a look at what those kids and the parents and the heroes in the school, what they did, and our view was if the kids can be brave enough to organize like this, we can be brave enough to take these out of here.
Last week, a number of other major companies, including Delta Airlines, MetLife Insurance, and Hertz Car Rental, announced they would be cutting their ties with the National Rifle Association. But Dick's has taken the strongest stance in the national gun debate. While the company says it still supports the right to bear arms, it is calling on elected officials to pass laws that would raise the minimum age to purchase guns to 21 years.
Daniel Mitchell, do you approve what those companies are doing?
I think private companies can do whatever they want. Now, I don't think it'll make a difference because we have 21-year age restrictions for buying alcohol, and you can ask every single 18 to 21-year-old in America, do you get alcohol regardless of that age restriction, and they'll say yes. And it's interesting to note that the public perception polling of these companies has dropped because the amount of the pro-gun control people who care about the issue is much less than the amount of pro-Second Amendment people who wind up getting a very negative view of these companies. So, it's probably not a good business decision in the long run, but it's their decision. It's not my job to tell a private company what to do.
Mariam Duo, you agree that it's probably not a good business decision for companies to wade into these political arguments?
I think that bearing in mind that image and reputation are the most valuable assets of a company, I think this is essentially companies doing the job of government, and it is not sustainable, it is not necessarily reliable to let companies self-regulate and make decisions that they can reverse any day, that are not going to be harmonized throughout the country. It is, once again, government not doing their job and companies taking matters into their own hands.
Companies not doing their jobs and taking matters into their own hands. Do you agree with that, Camille Kavan?
Well, companies have had political affiliations and political giving as long as there have been companies. And whether or not they're taking this issue into their own hands seems to me like a calculated business decision on their part. Businesses often have a bottom line, and some businesses have multiple bottom lines. And in the case of Dick's and Walmart, we can ask ourselves, are they operating on the second bottom line, perhaps a moral line that they think this is the way the country should behave, or is it really just cold economics? They believe that this will somehow increase sales. The answer to that is in a secretive boardroom somewhere. All we know is that this is par for the course. Corporations take and make political decisions and contributions all the time. This is just part of business.
All right, let me get the reaction of Mariah Phillips to something Georgia's lieutenant governor tweeted. He's not taking kindly to Delta Airlines' decision to revoke discounts for members of the National Rifle Association. Casey Cagle, who's running for governor, by the way, saying, "I will kill any tax legislation that benefits Delta unless the company changes its position and fully reinstates its relationship with the NRA. Corporations cannot attack conservatives and expect us not to fight back." It's a tax break of some $40 to $50 million for Delta. Its big hub is in Atlanta, Georgia. What's your reaction to that tweet?
Honestly, my gut reaction is the same reaction that I would have if a 3-year-old were throwing a tantrum in front of me at a supermarket. It's the same tactics of, well, if I can't have what I want, then you can't have what you want. In a way that's very showy, in a way that is just it's created just to get a reaction out of someone else.
And where is this going to, do you agree with the panelists that it's hard to tell what are Delta's true intentions? What do you think of Delta Airlines after all this?
Honestly, in the case of Delta and Dick's and Walmart, maybe I am a little bit cynical, but honestly, I don't believe that it's some altruistic part of them that is driving this. I think it's more of they think that if they can improve their image with the American people, then they'll be able to increase sales. So, I mean, I think that if in doing so, we can reduce the number of assault rifles that are out there being sold to people that really don't need assault rifles, then sure, more power to them.
Mariam Duo, let me ask you, because you, a lot of your work is in favor of environmental causes. And I know that a lot of corporations these days are making big statements about going green. Is this the shape of things to come, where a lot of these big decisions are going to come from the private sector?
I don't believe those statements. I think it is greenwashing. I think it is companies, again, trying to follow the movement and the trend of everybody being aware of the catastrophe that is climate change and the urgency that we need to do something about it. And they're trying to follow up on this. And we have the same problem at the EU level, where the EU signed the Paris Agreement. They're all very vocal and proactive on paper in climate change, yet in 4 years, since 2014, the EU has given 1.3 billion euros to the gas industry to create more gas infrastructures, which are not going to help us getting to that fossil-free Europe that we need. The recent scandal, not later than today, the Bulgarian government, which is holding the EU presidency at the moment for 6 months, leaked document revealed that the ongoing energy efficiency files that we have being negotiated at EU level, they admitted themselves that energy efficiency is, quote, a slogan. So these are, unfortunately, things that happen on a regular basis, and we prefer to trust actions over words.
You prefer to trust actions over words, but what about who is the driver for change on these issues? Who gets to be the driver?
In a cynical way, in Brussels, lobbyists and companies. You see that those decisions made in Brussels behind closed doors involve very, very often lobbyists, energy, tech, and finance are the three biggest kind of lobby groups here in Brussels. Brussels is the second capital of lobbying right after Washington, with between 25 and 30,000 lobbyists, which is the same amount of civil servants in the European Commission, just to give you an idea of the power that they have. And they use very clever techniques, such as going through public relation firms, law firms, associations, trade associations, to try to echo their message and make it seem like it's coming from different perspective, when in fact it is not. They are funding think tanks, they are funding NGO groups who pretend to speak on behalf of citizens, but in reality are really not, and are just promoting this agenda of status quo in the best case scenario, or even rolling back on some of the legislations that are needed at European level for the public interest.
Getting back to the United States, Kami Akavan, over the last 2 weeks, I've read in comments, some people thinking the only way you're going to get comprehensive gun control is if you first have comprehensive campaign finance reform, because you have to put some kind of check on lobbies.
It's a good point. The money is certainly part of the discussion. Money's a part of every issue and its lobbying effects in our federal legislature, state legislature, and then, of course, local governments. The bigger picture, in my opinion, is that this is not just about money. The United States is unique in that we have a Second Amendment. The rest of the world looks at this country and wonders, how do we continue to have this problem? Why is it that we have approximately 3 gun homicides per 100,000 people in this country, which, by the way, is the highest in the industrial world? Why do we continue to have this problem? And we keep asking ourselves that, and yet we're the only country with this degree of a problem in the first world. So I understand that it's very confusing for the rest of the world, but it is really because of the Second Amendment, and it is because of the tremendous number of guns that we currently have in this country. Look, guns are the #1 cause of murder in this country. They are the #1 cause of suicide in this country. We definitely have a gun violence problem. How do we go about treating that is where the debate is. And the problem, the biggest problem of all, and this is not just about gun control, this is about all of the areas of gridlock that happen in our country on hugely important issues: immigration, income inequality, and of course, gun violence. We are not talking to one another with any degree of respect. Civil discourse is out the window. We can't understand each other. We as citizens retreat into our echo chambers, retreat behind our filter bubbles, and do not understand how people could possibly think differently.
Kami, is that because For some, the government is part of the problem, and for others, government regulation is part of the solution. In the case of gun control, certainly, is that the overriding issue here? Not guns, but the role of regulation.
That's certainly a part of the issue. So, for instance, gun owners, part of their motivation is that they need to own guns in order to protect themselves from what, not just bad guys, but what could be a tyrannical government. They believe they need to own guns for the same reasons that revolutionary figures in this country owned guns, in order to protect themselves from the government. And that perception is not just a handful of people, it's a pervasive perception among people who own guns. So certainly that is part of it. But look, when the federal government was unable to act on passing anything meaningful regarding gun control, the states took it upon themselves, and we've had record amounts of state legislation on gun issues, and even local municipalities have gotten involved in order to make any kind of progress. We have majorities of people who agree on what direction this country should take on some important gun issues. So the issue is, why aren't those things happening? Part of it just comes down to what we do as people every single day. When something is uncomfortable to discuss, that's when we should discuss it. Arm ourselves with information on both sides of these debates, like we provide at ProCon, so that people can have informed, educated opinions and understand where other people are coming from. To me, that will solve not just this issue, but so many of the issues, not just in this country, but all around the world. It has to start with understanding the issues and understanding each other.
Daniel Mitchell, give Kami some good news. Where can there be common ground on this?
Well, I'm not sure I can share good news with them. As a matter of fact, when you look at what states have done over the last 10 years, they've liberalized and increased Second Amendment protections. They're passing concealed carry laws. They're passing stand your ground laws. They're passing castle doctrine laws. It has become easier for people to exercise their constitutional freedoms in the United States. Now, there are some cities, of course, that have very left-leaning mayors and city councils that are trying to move in the other direction. And there are certain states, maybe the way to break it down is maybe there's 35 states that are liberalizing gun ownership and maybe 15 states that are trying to restrict that part of the Constitution. But in general, the U.S. Is a very well-armed country. I will agree, we do have a gun violence problem. I mean, look at places like Switzerland and Israel, where fully automatic machine guns are actually readily available to large portions of the population. They don't have the shooting problems that we have. They don't have the murders, the suicides. Something is wrong in the United States. But here's maybe the optimistic thing I'll say. When I talk with my Democratic friends on Capitol Hill, and when we're just talking privately, not with cameras or anything like that, they'll admit that, no, gun control won't do anything. We really have to solve this cultural problem in the country. And I agree with that as well. But that's very, very difficult to do. I mean, how do we preemptively diagnose? I mean, for every crazy Parkland high school shooter, there are probably 200 troubled kids who display the same behavior, who never go on to kill anybody. Do we preemptively throw them in jail? I don't know. I know I disagree with Donald Trump. I don't think that we should take away due process legal protections. That's one of the things that makes America great. But we do have a problem.
We do have a problem. Let me bring in just because
politicians don't want to address the hard part.
Just very briefly, because we're almost out of time. Maria Phillips,
Yes.
Are you still, after this discussion, optimistic it could be a turning point?
I think if we continue to see the movement from the youth of America, then yes, I'm very optimistic that there will be a change. I think that throughout history, it has been the youth and not the establishment that affects change.
All right, we'll leave it there. Maria Phillips, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank Daniel Mitchell in Washington, Kami Akavan in Los Angeles, Miriam Duo in Brussels. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.
Thank you.
And we say hello to Charlie James.
Hello.
So Wednesday, first day back of school after 2 weeks for the students at Parkland in Florida.
That's right. So exactly 2 weeks after the massacre, the students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School went back to the classroom. It was a shortened day, not a full day, but 95% of students came back to the classroom. And we saw a couple of news outlets here that we can show you who followed families during the return to school. The New York Times followed a student named Brooke, who she herself saw 3 classmates die in her English class. She said that she wanted to return to see her friends and also to get a sense that she's reclaiming the school after this tragedy that really thrust these students in the school into the center of this national gun debate. And then we can see the CNN here followed a father whose daughter was killed in the shooting, and he took his son back, saying it was very bittersweet, obviously, to take his son back to the school without his sister, but said he actually feels that they're safe there, that he's not scared, because he said he thinks right now it's the safest school in America with all the attention, all the law enforcement that's there. The superintendent of the school said that they wanted it to be a day of healing for the students, and we have a couple of pictures that illustrate that. Desks from students who were killed were turned into sort of memorials with flowers and things that the students loved inside those classrooms. There was also a team of therapy dogs on hand to help the students deal with the emotions of being back in the school. And some of the students wanted to make their memorials a little more permanent. There were a number of students who actually got tattoos, so permanently on their body to commemorate the school, to commemorate the students. So it was definitely an emotional day for the entire community there in Parkland.
Yeah, and what's the online verdict or the media verdict on that meeting at the White House? Our panel was quite skeptical.
Well, Republican outlets, conservative outlets, were not happy, to say the least.
Okay.
We can look at the Weekly Standard here, which is a conservative magazine, and their headline is "Republicans Gobsmacked by Trump's Gun Control Comments." The two main issues for conservatives online, as you talked about with the panel, was number one, Trump's signaling his openness to just overall comprehensive gun control legislation. But really it was the comment about taking the guns first and worrying about due process second that upset people. This is pretty much Second Amendment advocates' worst nightmare, the idea that the government could come and take your guns out of your house. So we saw on the front page of Breitbart, the conservative outlet formerly run by Steve Bannon, Trump's ex-chief strategist, saying Trump the gun grabber. So being very forward of what they think about that. Fox News host Laura Ingraham wrote that if the president dives on the Second Amendment, he won't have to worry about who runs his 2020 campaign. Basically saying...
Sounds like a threat.
Yeah, a little bit. And as we know, Fox News is very pro-Trump. So to hear this coming from one of their most prominent hosts is no small thing. But there was one person who was ecstatic, and the internet is sharing it, who was Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is seated next to Donald Trump. And
Democrat of California,
who is seated next to Donald Trump. And this footage is making its way around the internet. You can see her clasping her hands and seems to do a sort of a fist pump, very excited about after he mentioned adding an assault weapons ban to this.
All right, and the gun control debate is, of course, this is what we were saying at the outset with Mariah, is that, the shooting happened 2 weeks ago, and it's not dying down, the interest and the attention.
Right, and that's normally what we see. We see sort of following after the shooter is captured, and then slowly interest wanes. But we haven't seen that. And Philip Bump wrote about this just yesterday in the Washington Post, and he has some interesting points on why this is happening. He included this graph here that shows the television coverage, cable news coverage in the United States, and how much it's continued, but not on talk of the shooter, which is normally what the coverage is about, but about the students. And so we can see there that it's really the student advocates who are keeping this going. And it's not just on cable news. We've seen this on Google Trends. The it's still one of the top searched topics, including number 2 there, what can I do about gun control? So people wanting to know how they can get involved, not just looking up the news.
Taking heart from that, Mariah?
Absolutely.
All right.
I think that's, wonderful to hear.
All right. I want to thank you, Charlie James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.